So thank you everyone for being here. Thanks, Dominic, for the kind introduction words. We know that we are programmed against some pretty big players, but we'll really try our best to make your time worth it. And I think we'll manage because we have an amazing panel here to start. We're going to discuss about quality content. We'll try to find a way to define what quality content means, at least for the 5 of us here. I don't think we're going to find a global description. That would surprise me in 50 minutes. And then we're going to discuss about business opportunities regarding digital natives and new players in the media field. So let me start by quickly introducing our panelists here. Miguel M.Burger-Calderon, he's the president, and I found that's an amazing job title at Elite Daily. What is a president exactly, Miguel? Well, I know what a president is, but what does it mean in your sense?
I guess in the US, the president in the media spaces can also be called the GM. So I'm pretty much responsible for everything except the editorial side. So I'm responsible on the commercial side for revenue partnerships, to work with the sales team, but also to make sure that the trains keep running. So also on the operational side, HR, finance, analytics, just like everything but editorial and content, video. Like that's what I'm responsible for.
Great, that explained it. Our next guest is B.Lo from Verb. So what is your job exactly at Verb?
So I'm the founder and CEO of Verb.
So since when does Verb exist?
So we started on the journey of creating the concept behind Verb all the way back in late 2011 and spent a lot of time just incubating ideas, thinking about what is the future of content and service interaction on the internet in general. But we actually launched our mobile application just last year. So we've been out in the market for just under a year.
Great. So moving on to my left, Chris Altchek from Mike. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Mike.
Yeah, so I started Mike in 2011, and our mission is to build the most trusted news and media company for our generation, and our generation are millennials.
Thanks so much, Chris. And A.Klöpping, founder of Blendle, a startup that many will know here because you just recently launched in Germany. Yes. And successful so far?
I think we do. We launched in Holland about 2 years ago. We launched in September in Germany, and we'll launch in the United States very soon. And the only reason why we would launch in a country if we have the majority of publishers on board on one platform. So our idea is that if you take all the premium sources, from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal to the Washington Post to the Economist and everything that's in between, and the magazines in one system, and let users pay per article in a very easy way. Yeah. Easy, it's important to state that. We make a really nice thing with animations and anything. And at the end of the article, if a user didn't like it, he can even ask for his money back. So we try to make micropayments and thus paying for journalism easy and comfortable. And it's apparently something that can work, as we've been doing this in Holland for quite a while, and see if we can expand this idea to other countries.
So let's just dive into the quality debate. Some words in your introductory statements included premium or best or the publisher for the generation, which already leads us to the question of quality. It's probably one of the toughest definitions to make. If you ask 100 journalists or 100 readers, I think you might get 100 different answers to that question. I'd like to get started with Chris and Miguel. Chris, when I asked you what quality content, your opinion is, you said it's forward-focused, smart, respectful, optimistic, and innovative content. And Miguel, when I asked you, you said, we believe that quality content should not blandly present information, but facilitate connection, community, and discussion. Now, I'm playing devil's advocate here, of course, but I picked some of the stories from Mike and Elite Daily, and it's also stories, not all of them, but it's also stories like, these male porn stars are straight, but they have sex with men for a living, or here's what Stephen Baldwin thinks about Hailey, whoever that is, dating Justin Bieber, or I like that one best. Pizza waffles are real, and the only thing you need in life.
I'd click that.
Video.
I'd definitely click that.
I'm not saying I wouldn't click those stories, but I'd argue that there would be a lot of people in journalism and media that would not say this qualifies as quality.
I'll jump in. So the first story about male porn stars was a story on Mike. That was a story that was reported over the course of 3 weeks. As you know, porn is a substantial industry in the US and in the world. If you look at the leading 10 sites in the United States that are not on ComScore, the top 5 are porn sites. The other 5 are Google, Facebook, etc. And so it's obviously a massive industry. And reporting on it in a deep way and looking at the trends is something that a news publisher should be doing. And I think it speaks towards the reason we exist as companies, which is we cover stories that matter to our generation that other publishers are not covering. And so quality for us is original reporting, it's telling important stories, and it's being connected to the audience first and foremost, which, if you look at the average age of CNN, for example, it's 63 years old. So that's how we see quality, and I think it's good in some instances when traditional publishers laugh at the stories we pick, even though we've probably reported them more deeply than they would ever imagine how.
What's the average age of your readers?
26.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. I obviously 100% agree with what Chris is saying. I think we get called out, and I always like to use the example when, and I'm sure Chris and his co-founder were going through the same, when we first started, a lot of people were calling us out and were like, oh, what you guys are doing is not really journalism, it's not the right way to do it. But what is the right way? As Chris just said, the reason why we exist is because you have all these topics that are definitely in our generation's minds. We think about it, but the traditional publishers never had the guts to write about it. And it's just like, why can we all think about that? Why can we all have it in our lives, but why can we not write about it? So that's really the relatability that we're going for. For us, quality content, when we say that we want to create content that is going to ignite the community and really create discussion, is because it's already in all our minds anyways, but nobody just has the guts to write about it. Then why not write about it and to create content is really relatable, that our readers are going to read that, either the one that the waffles that was on Elite Daily or about the porn sites that was on Mike, because it's something that are in our minds anyways and our generation is talking about anyways. Then why not do really quality content in a meaningful way, in a mindful way, as Chris was just saying, do really good research on it and then have people talk about it because it's in our minds already anyways. So it's that's where we think the traditional publishers lacking, that they just don't have this relatability the way for us. It's when we always say we create a piece of content, we think about the emotional gift. What emotional gift do we give you when you read it to really go beyond that double click? Because these days, so much clickbaity content is out there, So for us, success is not just being able to get you to click on it, it's really to engage with the content, to really like it, comment, share it, and check something else out, and really just spark your mind and really get you to think about that.
Okay. Great points, and I'd like to bring Alexander in on this point, because when I asked you about your definition of quality content, you said it's articles that differentiate themselves by digging in deeper. And I think that's an interesting point. So from your experience in the Netherlands as well as in Germany right now, what are articles that are appreciated by readers on Blendle? Can you give us a little bit of an overview?
Sure. So we ingest everything from all newspapers and magazines. So that's a subset. I mean, that doesn't include all journalism, but it's a decent subset. And these are thousands of articles every day in Germany and in Holland. And the funny thing is that if people need to pay with real money for the content that they're going to consume, their behavior is a little bit different. They don't pay for the news, for example. They don't pay for quick facts or short stories that have become a commodity. So sharing is not, for us, it's not the most important metric. For us, the most important metric is how many people ask for their money back. And what you see happening is that stories that do in-depth reporting, it's kind of what you'd expect people buying newspapers for: in-depth reporting, longer opinion pieces, big interviews, just anything that basically counts as original reporting, as opposed to the hot take on the complete other end on the spectrum. That stuff is what does very well on Blender and what starts trending, and that could completely be a waffle story, definitely, if it was in-depth original reporting and not some hot take on the waffle story, for example. So we have a lot of gossip magazines, for example, also in the thing, because I like to read them, but there's only a part of those gossip magazines that do really well, and that's not the stuff that they fill the magazine. It's not the filler content, it's the original content that they put on the cover. That's the stuff that does well. So yeah, we have this weird metric that not a lot of companies have, and we try to keep close attention to that.
Do you actually see, I mean, in Germany, it's probably too early to tell because you just started, but in the Netherlands, do you see publishers react to the data they get in terms of reframing the way they do content? Do they learn from what they get from Blender?
Yeah, and I think this is the biggest impact is with publishers that currently don't do a lot of differentiated stuff on the web. There is still, throughout Europe, there's so many publishers that just put the content from their print stuff directly on the web and don't change anything. Like there's headlines in Blender, like there's a column or whatever, and the headline is freedom or whatever, and it's on page 3, so people know, oh, it's this and this columnist, and people who do the print newspaper actually recognize that. But that doesn't translate to the web, so we actually, we stimulate them to do that a little bit. We do some A/B testing on headlines for them and the most basic stuff, but that's already like hugely impactful for these, for a lot of these newspapers and magazines. And you'd actually what these guys are doing, like originally digital reporting. I mean, it's very, very different from what most legacy publishers still do. Huge chunk of them. So we try to help them a little bit and you see journalists responding to that because they see some type of articles and introductions working better than the stuff that they were previously doing. They weren't looking at data at all. Yeah. And this is, still true for such a big amount of journalists. So we help them with that, and at the same time, we know now that publishers start to learn what they can earn extra from Blender. So for example, the journal, Wall Street Journal, they said, the stories that were converting very well to subscriptions, they have types of stories that apparently do well in converting to subscriptions, are not exactly the same ones that are doing very well on Blender, which is interesting, because then apparently there's some articles that really convert to lasting members very well, and some articles that people are actually willing to spend money on, but not directly wanting to get a subscription. So it's nice to have this diversified stuff yet.
Thanks. Let me bring Bobby into the quality debate, because I think you'll have an interesting perspective to add. What you do with Verb is and tell me if I'm wrong, but you're actually defining quality more in terms of quality of a service and quality of what you offer the user at what time of day and what his needs are at a certain time. Right. Can you explain quickly what Verb does?
Absolutely. So just as a quick introduction to Verb, what we do is really create a mobile search and content discovery platform. And what we're trying to do as a company is really look, there's so many things that you can do on your mobile phone today. There's 1.6 million apps that you can choose from, and you have all these apps that are vying for your attention. You have media, news, content, services, and the fact is, when we're using our phones, everything is very fragmented. And so what we're trying to do with Verb is actually create an integrated platform that connects people to the most relevant content, the most relevant services, and social recommendations in one experience. So just as a quick example, if I wanted to do something like plan a night out, in today's world, you'll use maybe 8 to 10 different apps. In the US, you'd use something like Yelp, Foursquare, OpenTable, Google Maps, IMDb, so on and so forth. And what we're saying is, look, a user can actually get a lot more value if we create an integrated experience where we're actually surfacing up what is the most interesting content, the interesting service for you. And so when you look for something like, a restaurant will actually say, hey, rather than you having to decide one app to go into, we're actually going to give you information from multiple services in one interface. So you're getting that Yelp score, you're getting the open table reservations availability, so on and so forth. And in some ways, it mirrors kind of what WeChat has been doing in Asia of bringing all this content under one roof. So back to the question of quality content, we think about as what is it the information that a user wants to actually accomplish their actions or their tasks on a mobile phone.
Okay, so I'd argue there is a certain aspect of personalization targeted towards specific audiences in the quality content debate. You guys are, together with several other publishers, how should I say, fishes in the same pond in a way, because call them millennials or digital natives, or define them by age, 14 or 18 to 30 something. Is this pond big enough for so many players?
I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so many. In the US alone, you have 80 million millennials, and globally, you have, I don't know how many hundred of millions. And
2.5 billion.
2.5 billion, sorry. There you go. And
it's a big pond.
Yeah, and also I think in the content space, it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Just because somebody reads Elite Daily doesn't mean they can't read Mike. It's like we go for the same audience, but I think we go for the same audience with very different strategies and very different aspects of life. For us, it's more about lifestyle. If you can, for example, you can get up in the morning, you can go on Elite Daily, and you can maybe look for something around dating, around humor, around something about life aspect, and then you can go on Mike and see some really interesting stories about news, or even the same topic. Like sometimes we cover the same topic just from a different angle. It's like, as you say, every person, every writer has a different aspect. So I think that it absolutely is big enough for everybody, because everyone has their own unique way. And that's where I'm very proud of our team, because I think we really created our own voice and created our own brand. And Mike did a really good job at that as well. And then you have other publishers that just jumped on the bandwagon and really just tried to do the quick Facebook game and just did a lot of listicles and didn't really create a quality brand and their own voice, and just created casts and gifs and listicles. And you'll see that the Facebook party is over, and you see those publishers lost a dramatic amount of traffic over the last 12 months. So I think now you're really going to see who really worked on creating quality content and who just did quick cutter like listicles.
I mean, my perspective is pretty simple. You have a lot of publishers in legacy media that are losing a lot of revenue every year. I mean, print magazines are down, 3 to 10% year over year. You also have $69 billion of TV brand advertising in the US alone that's starting to move into digital. There will be multiple billion-dollar media businesses built off of this audience. I have no doubt about that over the next 5 years. Yeah.
The Facebook party is over, so what's the next party? Where does the traffic come from? Where does the revenue come from? Facebook party over, or does anyone disagree?
No, it's just a different, distribution changes every 6 months in our era as mobile phones come online, as new platforms emerge. We did not have Snapchat Discover 14 months ago. We did not have Facebook Video 18 months ago. The landscape is changing so fast, and that's why new digital media businesses have been able to build huge audiences and large revenue streams quickly because we are first on every new platform, and we are working with brands more closely on every new platform to monetize them. So the game of driving one article to 10 million people on Facebook is over, but now you have instant articles, Google AMP, Facebook Video, Snapchat Discover. We reach 30 million people a month, and we're a brand that was launched 5 years ago. That is pretty large compared to many publishers, and we expect to be reaching 40 million by the end of this year and 50 million by early next year. And the exciting part is, advertisers are very excited to jump into new platforms. Anybody who sells ads here has heard the phrase, never been done before. There are a lot of opportunities for never been done before right now, and publishers that move fast and provide quality have, I think, the most exciting revenue opportunities for growth we've seen in a long, long time.
It's interesting, though, because, I mean, all of these technology platforms that came up in the last year or so, they all are pointed towards ads. And it's interesting to me. So for Facebook to Apple News to all of the aggregator platforms, they all drive around ads. And the problem that most legacy publishers have, which is not something that needs to be fixed for you guys, but the problem for most legacy publishers is that they used to have ad revenue. The whole thing that they're trying to do is get extra revenue from their readers, like subscriptions or any other way of making money. And to some extent, all the new platforms, they create scale, but they don't help you in getting extra revenue out of the users. And to me, this is very interesting, and how much journalism is changing for every distribution method that comes along. I mean, it was search engine optimization first, and then came Facebook, and that came down again, and now we're in new distribution, but always centered around ads. And I think this is one of the crucial problems that need to be fixed. Not that we cannot have ads anymore, because I think it's great that most of it is supported by ads. But it cannot be just ads. It needs to be more. And I think the very clear trend for this year, and I talk to a lot of publishers now in my life. This is my life now. I'm on planes, and then I go and talk to publishers. And all of them say, like this, even the ones that used to go for scale, even the VC-backed ones, are all saying this is the year that we're going to experiment with getting money directly from our users. And I think that's super interesting, and it's changing right now, and it's actually against what the technology companies are doing with their ad work. And this disconnect is obviously is nice for me because I'm in that hole and I like to fill that hole, but even as an observer, this is a really interesting disconnect right now.
I just want to echo that. Just in terms of what we're seeing broader in terms of what's going on in advertising. I think publishers need to start thinking more than just your typical sort of banner ads or ads that are injected into these news articles, because what we've seen recently is Apple saying, hey, when you inject these ads into mobile websites, it gives people a really bad experience. And so if you want to reach your audience and you want to, really monetize, we're seeing more and more people thinking about how do we deliver, say, native sort of content or native sort of advertising or transactional sort of monetization on that content. Because if a big company like Apple is coming in and saying, look, it's no longer acceptable to just do plain banner ads, that actually raises the bar. And I actually think it's great for users because it gives them more relevant sort of advertising or monetization from these publishers and content companies.
As for the reach game for Elite Daily, do you think you'll ever move into the paid game, like user subscription paid?
We've definitely have discussions about it internally. My view on it is, I was actually talking with Chris about it last night at dinner, as I'm a terrible example. I'm a very tough customer to get to pay for content, so I barely pay for Netflix. I believe that to get our generation to pay for content is going to be really tough because we're so used to getting content from all the different platforms. And I totally agree with what Chris was saying. Like, today you really have to be able to create content for all the different platforms, like the Google Amps, the Facebook and the article, and you always have to be on the latest game, because what might work on Facebook is not going to work on Pinterest, is not going to work on Twitter, and is not going to work on Snapchat. So you always have to think about creating content for all the different platforms. And that's, to answer your question that you asked at the very beginning, when you asked, okay, I say the Facebook party is over, what is it moving over? It's just different. It's just like, we call it the platform area. We think that now it's really thinking about platform-agnostic content for all the different platforms that are coming out. And God knows what's going to be out in 6 months. And I think that we're so used, at least our generation is so used to getting all this content from all these different platforms, that I personally believe it's going to be very tough to get our generation to be willing to pay to consume content.
But still, you were saying the same thing about music 10 years ago, probably. Like, I never expected to pay for music ever.
But again, I'm a bad example. I only go on SoundCloud.
But I mean, it's actually, I think it's a pretty serious point that people are now willing to pay for movies and for music. Well, honestly, I think most people wouldn't think so 10 years ago with the advent of free. And even you could get every song for free on YouTube right now. Still, tons of people are paying for Spotify, and I think it says something on the value of these platforms. That great discovery, having a unified experience, having your social graph there. Actually,
but are people willing to pay that much that it's going to become a long-lasting, viable business?
I think
because look at Spotify. They can barely create the price level, the price that you are, for example, willing to pay for it, but they still have to pay so many royalties, and they still have to fight with people like Taylor Swift who still think they're not getting enough. And I think it's a great product, but they've already raised so much money, and they're getting beaten down on really bringing the business to profitability. So are people willing to pay enough to build a long-lasting, viable company? I mean, and my point is that Spotify, for example, right now, they haven't succeeded.
I would disagree, and sort of I agree with Alexander on this, that we're still very early in the digital media revolution, and at Mike we will be testing several paid services over the course of this year. Our advertising business is going gangbusters, but why not try? And I think we've seen now several examples, Blendle being a really exciting one where it's starting to work. The problem and the issue is the content quality has to be that much better and that much more differentiated, which is tough for anybody in the news business. And that's why having a diversified offering is really interesting. But it's very clear, at least in the United States, from Netflix to Hulu to Spotify, that people are willing to pay for content. And that this is a trend that's emerging and going to grow. So I think it's going to take a few years to settle up, but you will see in the United States for the first time in many years a lot of experiments, from Blendle to people like Mike trying a lot of different things.
But that's the examples you just mentioned. That's serious quality content. I mean, that's but $1 million budgets going into original series like Netflix or like Amazon, and that I absolutely agree. I think you're willing to pay for that, but I mean, let's be honest. Like, we don't have these budgets. Like, we're not going to be able to create $1 million budget series right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it depends what kind of content you're doing. We launched a series last week that was shot in 12 different cities in the U.S. The budget was not $1 million, but pretty close. And I think is a really differentiated video content that we think has legs. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, it's totally an experiment, but the exciting part is this experimentation is now happening across the US, and it really wasn't happening 2 years ago.
I'd also argue that it's probably necessary to just move away from the idea that people are paying for content per se, but that there is also a layer of, you called it usability or call it ease of use or whatever. You were talking about the service part of it, that there might be, or that there is a big opportunity on that side of things, because I'd argue that people in the music business or TV business, people buy stuff there, don't just buy the content itself, but also an experience in a way.
Well, I mean, Bobby's example is the best. I mean, they're solving a problem. So it's not it's a user experience, but it's really they're solving a core user problem, and people will pay for that. Part of it is the service, part of it is the content. Those things are bundled very, very closely together, which I think is why when you say quality content in and of itself, without looking at the service, the distribution channel, it's very hard to define it.
Right. I mean, you have to look at the whole experience for the user. What is the platform? How are they actually accessing that content? And then, from there, you can look at, based on the context, what is that content? What is that platform? Looking at what are those monetization opportunities. So, a very simple example could be, hey, I'm reading a really high quality article on the top travel destinations. And so for us, we can actually take that curated information, bundle it with kind of the high quality services that we offer, as well as the vendors, and actually create transactional revenues through that.
So what do you see, give us some examples, what you see with Verb as rising use cases or as bundles that make sense, combining, publishers' content or content per se with services?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the cool opportunities that we have at Verb is to say, on one side, we work with really high quality services like content, like companies like Yelp, right? They are the sort of the authoritative service, best in class in the US for restaurant reviews. We work with, like Rotten Tomatoes for movies reviews, things like that. And so we give people kind of this high quality information from these services, but at the same time, we can partner with publishers of content, of more of like media companies that say, here's the best destinations in Munich, or here's the top 10 movies curated by this. And so what we can do is now actually integrate both the information that comes from the publisher side of like a media company, of a journalist writing some editorial content with these underlying services, and become sort of that connector, and then offering the user actions that they can take out of this. So I think that's a really powerful approach.
Okay. Let me move on to one more round about the ominous millennials and
I sense a skeptic.
No, I just feel that there is a certain hype around it. I mean, just if you look at the US and also Germany, how many things have been launched targeted towards millennials. I just feel that, and probably I should say that the definition of millennials that's used in Germany is sometimes rather blurry, while the definition of millennials used in the US has some kind of demographic research behind it. But here it basically means just everyone between 20 or something and 35, which to me, to be honest, is somehow weird, because I'm 35 and I might have not that much in common with another 35-year-old. So why that, I would call it a hype. So why is this generation so interesting for publishers or media startups?
Yeah, I mean, look, you look at the demographics. If you're running a big media company in Germany or in the US, and you look at your user base, and you realize that the vast majority of them are 45 and up, but at least in the US, the majority of people are actually younger, you realize you have a business challenge, and a very big business challenge. So that's one. Two is this generation is very coveted from advertiser standpoint, because they're actually pretty wealthy at the top, and their spending power is about to be 1.2 trillion in the US alone. And so you're getting to the point where you have a lot of people who spend a lot of money who don't consume your product at all. And so if I'm a legacy publisher, I'm going to panic. And if I'm an advertiser working with a legacy publisher, I'm going to panic because my budgets are not reaching the people that are going to be spending money over the next 5 years. So you may call it hype, but the numbers are hyped because they're horrible if you're many legacy publishers.
It's also, this is life or death for publishers in Europe, because in the United States, there's a lot of publishers that still make 80% of their revenue out of advertising and 20% out of subscriptions. Very often in Europe, it's completely the other way around. And, these people are dying. The ones who are paying for journalism. Like, at the end of the funnel, they die. At the beginning of the funnel, no one enters. So every year, the average age rises with 1 year. So, this is a big problem. And a lot of publishers in Europe don't have the luxury to experiment a lot with subscription models, because that's not the core of currently how they make money. So it's even in the United States, it's already something that everyone is discussing. But in Europe, I feel like we're not actually discussing it enough, because the problem is actually bigger here than in the United States.
I also believe the hype is really big because our generation, as Chris said, rightfully so, has a really high purchasing power, but also it's more and more difficult to reach in a meaningful way. We're the one generation that really grew up around technology. They were really mobile agnostic. We're thinking about mobile. It's a smaller screen. You have a lot of space to reach your audience as so many different platforms, as we were saying, is around. So the first part is it's really difficult to get our attention. And then once you have our attention, you really have to be careful to not be intrusive, because our generation is also about, in a way, it's very narcissistic. It's our time is really worth a lot. So it's really difficult to get our attention in a meaningful way as a brand, because we grew up with the rise of technology, with all the different like programmatic networks, with the advertising, with the display advertising, and our generation really don't like this display advertising. Really don't think that it's a meaningful way to reach us if you're a brand. And for some reason, the traditional publishers, it took them a really long time to really understand. Actually, I think that's why we're in business, because the majority of them still don't really understand us and don't understand how to reach us in a meaningful way. And that's why there's this hype also for the agencies and the brands, because they come to us, and it's more in a consultative way. It's a lot of the brands of a lot of our anchor clients, the way we speak with them is the best relationship we have them when they come to us and they really trust us and they really listen to us on how to meaningfully reach our audience through a brand campaign that give us the creative freedom to show them how to do it.
Yeah, please.
And I was just going to add, at the end of the day, I think what really differentiates millennials is, millennials are really accustomed to, or they've had so much choice, right? They have the choice of all the different content providers they can use. They have the choice of all those different apps that they can use. And so when we think of it from a mobile-centric ecosystem, everyone's putting out different apps. The switching costs are very low. Loyalty is very low. And so what we hear a lot from app publishers are, hey, we invested a ton of money building this app because the statistics show 87% of the time people spend on their phones is within apps. But the reality is, look, people only use about 27 apps per month. So if you're spending a ton of money creating these apps, you're going to get very low engagement and retention from these users because they'll just jump to the next shiny thing when they find it. And so for publishers, for content providers, it's a battle of how do you really think outside the box and move out of conventional models.
And one thing that struck me is that many words that you use talking about this generation are kind of emotionally loaded. It's like the forward thinking and optimistic that you used in the description of quality content, but also this approachable and emotional value. Is it a generation? Do you have to add a layer of, let's say, emotion to all the content you do to reach this generation?
Absolutely, I absolutely think so. I mean, again, as I said earlier on, for us, when we create content, we think about the emotional gift. I always come back to that because it's about the relatability. It's like if you can really relate to the content, if it really means something to you, that's when you will react to it in the strongest way. And it's not just content; it's about everything. Like what moves you, moves your emotion, what moves your life. It's like something that really, and you can have relatability with it, and really just sparks this emotion in you.
I mean, the first wave of this emotion things led to the let's call it the upworthiness of content in a way of this dad heard the saddest thing about his son and you see what happened next and he's crying. How can we find the path between not emotional and this?
I think it's back to the original point of having the content and the service really closely linked. People expect a really good experience. And so how do you provide a really good experience, no matter what your kind of content you're providing? So a very basic example is the weather in the US. You have this new app called Poncho, which is doing incredibly well in the US. And what they do is they deliver the weather to you on a personalized basis through emojis. It's growing incredibly well, and it's clever, entertaining, super accurate way to get the weather, but it's not the traditional way. And I think that's a good example where you're combining a core service with a usable interface and a usable type of content. It's obviously very different than what we do at Mike, but I wouldn't say that weathermen may be upset about the use of emojis in the weather, but I think they're probably wrong to be upset. And so when you think about news, you look at the types of headlines that are now getting written. In the 19th and 20th centuries, news was primarily sold in the US by hawkers. These were young kids who were paid below minimum wage, or actually wasn't minimum wage, young kids who sat on the side of the street and yelled headlines. And the kid who yelled the crazier headline usually sold more papers. This was 2 centuries of newspaper sales in the US. Writing a good headline has been part of the job of newspapers for a long, long time. And to expect straight news, boring headlines to win today is a good reason to go out of business.
How do you see that at Blendl? Do you see at Blendl that emotion is something that triggers a payment impulse?
As we don't write ourselves, we don't really pay a lot of attention to that. See, because
I don't believe
No,
that.
you're A/B testing
You're
headlines.
analyzing the content, right?
Yes, so it does the A/B testing of headlines, and I mean there are like long form Economist pieces from the Economist that are extremely nicely done and well done that have really boring headlines. So we spuffed that up a little bit, and we can actually get a new audience for that. So there's some truth in that.
Pay more.
Yes, and people pay more. We know that too. But at the same time, I think it's important to state that the Upworthies and all the ones that only used to go for scale, a lot of them, even like for the Huffington Post, just Highline. We have Mike. There is the work that Vox is doing, the work that BuzzFeed News is doing. It's really good that's coming out of these publications that only used to go for scale and do listicles. In a lot of them only used to do listicles in the beginning. So there is also a movement towards doing more quality content, even from the circles where most legacy publishers wouldn't expect it. So I'm actually quite optimistic about that. And most journalists still think that young people with their Facebook and their Snapchats are only interested in stupid stuff. But I mean, there's a very strong counter argument to be made, I think, and two of those guys are on this stage here.
I think I would totally agree with that. I would argue that a lot of people say that our generations only cares about emojis and listicles. I think we still care very much so in really good news content, just in a different way. We want the same kind of information, just packaged in a different way. A great example is, and again, our core is not news, but we always try and try to innovate and think about different things as well. And one thing, for example, is that when Ebola broke out about 2 years ago and was a really big topic, we thought, okay, how can we cover it? Because we're never going to beat CNN, or we're never going to Fox and being quick, and we didn't just want to do the hard facts. So we thought, well, how is it going to be packaged in a way that our generation likes? So we like it to have it snackable, quick. So we just did the 10 main facts that you need to know about Ebola, and it was all the right facts. It was well researched, but it was just easy and condensed to take it on and know what's going on. And it was actually one of the articles at the time that went viral and did really well. But it wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't any crazy picture. And it was just the facts, but just in the right way.
One thing that I'm seeing, if I look at Elite Daily and Mike and some of the other players, is that there is kind of a move back from just what you said, the thing, everything has to move and everything has to have 27 different kinds of multimedia things, a move back to text and video with relatively plain, without too much, fancy, glittering multimedia data visualization in it. Do you think that's just for you guys, or do you see a trend in the industry back focusing on the content itself rather than basically the presentation?
No, I think that the visualization is definitely important, and I mean we're actually toying around with it right now on how we want to do more graphic visualization. But again, I think what excites us is rather than just doing it the plain, simple way and just putting a graph with just the data on it, it's how are you going to take it a step further? How are you going to make it more interactive? So when we think with our graphic designers, how do we want to make a long-form piece of content, for example, because we do think about how can we create more long-form, journalistic, really good researched content, and some of our writers want to go more that direction. We've been writing more shorter form content, but we actually want to try new things. And then we think, okay, but how are we going to make sure that we don't lose our audience in a 2,000-word essay? Because that's something that we realized that, that's what the Wall Street Journal is and some others, and that's the reason why we're in business, because we realized that's not what our generation really wants, but they still want that kind of information. So we're thinking about how do we make it a long-form interactive piece with infographics, but also you can toy with it and maybe put in some Twitter things or something through Instagram where you can really take the whole long form, but you can also depict it in its own little pieces, and you can share it and you comment on it. It's just taking all the tools that the digital world has given us and putting into one.
And also, it's so important to emphasize, I mean, young people, as you said, it's not that all young people are just going to throw on one thing and this is what journalism for young people should look like. I mean, this is differentiated, and it's always been the case. Some people like to read the Post, some people like to read the Times, some people like to read the Journal. These are very, very different groups, and the same is true for young people. And I mean, for me, the most important thing is that there's a lot of people willing to spending a lot of time on the news, and that's where a lot of the time is going through, even for young people. But at the same time, I always remember this story from a Dutch news site. There was a very short story that said there's a city in Holland that's the biggest employer right there is the weed business, the marijuana business, and it was a completely black market, 700 million euro market a year, which is interesting because it's a small town. And it was a factual story, and the mayor was angry, and the politicians, all the other politicians were angry, and that was the story. But the story came from original reporting from a quality Dutch newspaper who had 2 pages, and it started with, it's 7:15 in the morning, all the scooters in the city start buzzing, because that's the moment when they transport the weed from the warehouses to the coffee shops, and that's the moment when that's because the policemen actually take their night shift to day shift coffee break, and that's where you can move. And this whole story is one big expose on how this works in Holland, with the people at the telecom companies doing the listening and the informants at the police. Beautiful, beautiful journalism. Pieces like that can do 10,000s of euros on our platform. This is just fucking Holland, right? It's super, super, super small. And if you have really good original reporting, we know that people are willing to pay for that. And for that specific piece, half of the users were under 35 of age. These are not people who pay for journalism normally. They do not take a subscription to a newspaper. And they were fine willing to pay. There were only a couple of pictures. There were no huge mega multimedia things about it. It was just plain, really, really good reporting. There's still value in that, and there's still young people willing to pay for that. And it's not different than, I think, 20 years ago.
We're nearly at the end, and in the last 3 minutes, I'd like to ask all of you, is there one competitor in the market or one organization that you look up to for quality content? One that sticks out for you?
Well, look up to, it's not particularly about as in competition with Blendle or whatever, but I'm really, really impressed with work that Vox is doing. The way they're basically building this, the new Condé Nast maybe, yeah. And only the work they're doing on YouTube. I find myself being on my TV, being behind my TV, just doing the YouTube app with the Chromecast thing, and I'm looking at the Vox channel all night, which is interesting because I rather do that than watch TV. Yeah. They do that very well.
In the United States, we have a national public radio, which does an incredible job of actually making the news compelling through great storytelling, amazing podcasts. And we respect them, which is why we hired their executive editor.
That's a good way to respect someone.
I guess from the app-centric point of view, there isn't kind of like one particular company that I would say, mirrors or something that we look up to for one specific thing, but it's really thinking about, wow, there's all these different content providers. They're all doing something that's really good, very unique. And so what I look at is how do we elevate that experience for our users when they're looking for something, and here's a service that does something really well they might not have heard of. And so one very quick example is, not only do you have like Yelp for the star ratings of restaurants, but we also work with a startup called Tastemade down in LA. And what they do is they actually provide 1-minute video reviews that people film of restaurants. And that's an example of very differentiated, very high quality content that we can help our users find.
For me, it's actually 2 with very different backgrounds. One is The Economist. I like to read The Economist. I think it's always a great recap of the week, what's been going on in politics in the world. Also is really good.
Do you have a subscription?
I do not.
How do you get around the paywall?
That's just
a great. No. It's a great question. I do not have it, but we have it at the office. And I always love to read The Economist just every week. It's a great recap of the week on what's going on, very well written. And the other one is Vice. I have a lot of respect for Vice. I think they're great at picking up stories that other people were not talking about before. And they also just created a very raw, authentic voice over the many years. And just 2 very different publications, but I think they're both doing a great job at what they're doing.
Thank you so much. We're exactly out of time. Thanks for the debate, and thanks for having us.